This is the story of Rick James versus Prince Part 1. In April of 1978, the world was introduced to two men who would become music icons. Prince came out with his debut album, For You, on April 7th, and shortly after, on April 20th, Rick James burst onto the scene with his debut album, Come Get It. For me, there's nothing like working in a recording studio. It's satisfying. It's like painting. Soon it's like the monitors are canvas. The instruments are colors on a palette. The mics and board are brushes. I just keep working it until I've got the picture. He got the picture, and one of the songs from the album, a song called Soft and Wet, charted and received play on the radio. It doesn't seem like me, mainly because where I live is kind of isolated from the musical scene in itself. I can only tell what's going on from reading magazines. When I hear Soft and Wet on the radio, it seems like someone else is singing. Looking forward to his next album, Prince said, "I've written 20 songs for the next album, and I think Warner's is going to let me handle all of the record again. I didn't have any particular thing I was trying to accomplish on the first record. I was just putting down what I heard in my head. I wouldn't say the second one will be like the first, but it'll sound like me." Prince's focus was all on his music. When asked about becoming a star, he said, "I don't think about it. It's all just part of the dream factory. If it happens, it happens. It's best not to even worry about that, because if you strive for it and don't get it, you'll be disappointed and feel like a failure." Prince's mind was certainly in the right place, and even though his debut album didn't spawn any major hits, it did help introduce Prince's talents to the world. Come Get It, on the other hand, was a breakthrough, with You and I becoming a smash hit, reaching #1 on the R&B chart, and Mary Jane becoming an enduring fan favorite. Atlanta had started playing it, and now people were jumping on it like hotcakes up and down the East Coast. After years and years of struggling, I had a hit record. I had always said if I ever got one hit record, my momentum would be unstoppable. Now I would show this world what Rick James was all about. I was on my way. You and I was #1 R&B, #1 disco, and top 5 pop. Black FM radio was playing almost everything on the album, including Dream Maker, Stone City Hollywood, and Mary Jane. It was looking like Mary Jane would be my next single. The trade magazines were calling Come Get It the biggest black album of the year. The album was platinum and on its way to double, and Motown was already talking about my second album. Rick James's second album, entitled Bustin' Out of L7, was released the following year in January of 1979. Bustin' Out of L7 helped to solidify Rick's place in funk history, showcasing his unique punk-funk style. It was a key moment in his rise to superstardom. Bustin' Out received great reviews. The first single was called High on Your Love, an up-tempo tune. I wrote a ballad called Spacey Love, which I dedicated to Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. I hadn't met Patti yet, and I couldn't wait for the day. She was my favorite. The song was a cross between Afro and funk. It was a long number, almost a suite, and it went through a number of variations and changed. I thought she would like it. She and I would later become great friends. Bustin' Out was the track from this album. It had moderate success on the Billboard Hot 100 and peaked at #8 on the R&B chart, showing its popularity in the R&B and funk community at the time. The song, with its funky grooves and rebellious message, became a signature Rick James track and helped cement his influence in the world of funk. Everything in my life was going perfect. Bustin' Out was at the top of the charts. I was finally ready to go on tour. The cross-country tour would visit over 40 cities. The venues on the tour were 2,500 to 4,500 people. Little did I know it then, but those halls would be too small. The tour ran smooth, except that everywhere we played there were near riots. The venues were too small, and every night there were more people outside the arenas trying to get in than there were inside. It was fantastic. The small venues would cause more serious problems, though. According to Rick, when playing at the Orpheum Theater in Boston, there were thousands of kids milling around trying to get in. And after the show, he and his band came out and saw police officers assaulting black fans. As I watched the cops assaulting my fans, I just cried. I felt responsible and promised myself from then on, I would only play places that could hold the kind of crowds we were getting. I never broke that promise. The challenges of the tour left a lasting impression on Rick James, both emotionally and professionally. Determined to honor his promise to only perform in venues that could safely accommodate his growing fan base, he began focusing on larger arenas. This decision marked a turning point in his career, reflecting both his rising popularity and his commitment to his audience. Later that year, on October 16th, Rick released his third album, Fire It Up. The album reached number 34 on the Billboard 200 and climbed to number 5 on the R&B chart, eventually selling over 1 million copies. Fire It Up went platinum, and critics loved it, calling it one of my best works, although I never thought so. Rick later reflected, the fact that it had been written, recorded, and mixed in 13 days impressed a lot of the musical press. Just days after the release of Rick's Fire It Up album, Prince's second album, which was simply titled Prince, was released, and much like Rick, it didn't take Prince long to complete his album, with sessions beginning in late April of 1979 and wrapping by mid-June. This album was pivotal in his early career, marking his emergence as a serious artist and multi-instrumentalist. It was this album that introduced him to a wider audience. The album sold 3 million copies and was certified platinum, and 3 of its singles climbed the R&B chart, with I Wanna Be Your Lover going all the way to number 1 and crossing over to number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. Prince would embark on his first U.S. tour in support of the album. The concerts were well received, and Prince and his band would soon find themselves on a bigger stage, opening for the king of punk funk. It was time for me to go back on tour. This time I wanted to go 20,000 seaters all the way, but I needed an opening act. There was a record burning up the airwaves called I Wanna Be Your Lover by some cat named Prince. He played guitar, and everyone was telling me how a tour with me and him would be great. I bought his album and I really enjoyed it, especially Sexy Dancer. I thought the kid was pretty funky, so I asked for the company to send me a video on him. I received the video, and as I watched him, I thought he reminded me a bit of myself, except he didn't move as much. I asked Prince to open up the Fire It Up tour. Our first date was down south. I hadn't met Prince yet. In fact, the only thing I had heard about him was that he was shy. I had hoped he wasn't too shy, or he had no right being on the road with me, that's for sure. When I walked in through the backstage entrance, Prince was sitting on his group's drums playing some BS beat. I sat down on our set where he could see me and began playing some serious stuff. He looked over at me and just got his little behind up and walked away. That was my first victory. And so Rick had won the first of many battles, but now it was showtime. Prince hit the stage and performed songs like Soft and Wet, Why You Wanna Treat Me So Bad, Still Waiting, Sexy Dancer, and I Wanna Be Your Lover. While there was no denying Prince's talents, according to Rick, some male fans in attendance didn't enjoy his set due to his stage attire. The first time I saw Prince and his band, I felt sorry for him. Here's this little dude wearing high heels, playing this new wave rock and roll, not moving or anything on stage, just standing there wearing this trench coat. Then at the end of his set, he'd take off his trench coat, and he'd be wearing little girls' bloomers. I just died. The guys in the audience just booed the poor thing to death. Now it was time for the headliner. Rick and the Stone City Band came out and set the place on fire, and everyone's eyes were glued to the stage, including Prince's, according to Rick. Whenever I was on stage, I'd see Prince on the side of the stage just staring and watching everything I did, like a kid in school. I'd walk over to him during a song and point my bass right in his face, grab my crotch, give him the finger, and keep jamming. He was remembering everything I did like a computer. I used to do all these tricks with the microphone, flip it, catch it backwards, you name it. It was a trademark of mine. I also used to do a lot of crowd chants. I'd have my hand on my ear while I called these funk chants to the audience. This was another trademark. Prince must have been a fan of the things Rick was doing on stage because, according to Rick, Prince started stealing almost everything he did. One day I walked into the auditorium, getting ready to go on, and I heard the crowd chanting loudly. I went to check it out. Here's Prince doing my chants. Not only that he was stalking the stage just like me, doing the funk sign, flipping the microphone and everything. The boy had stolen my whole show. I was pissed, and so was my band. This went on night after night. Every show I'd see more of my own routine. It got to the point I couldn't do the stuff I'd always done because Prince was doing it before I came on. It started to look like I was copying him. According to Rick, this would continue for a while, so they decided to have a meeting about it. First, he met with Prince's manager and told him that if Prince did any more of his routine, he'd be kicked off the tour. Then they all met in Prince's room where the Stone City Band and Prince's band patched up their differences, but Prince barely said a word. According to Rick, things went back to normal after this. Levi Ruffin from the Stone City Band said, 9 times out of 10 when we got finished with our show, people forgot who the F the opening act was. Now let's see what Morris Day had to say. The tour wound its way across the country for over 3 months, selling out the Omni in Atlanta and the Cobo Arena in Detroit. Started out great. Prince came out smoking, not literally but figuratively. Soft and Wet was usually the opener. He'd also go into I Feel For You. He'd squeeze Head somewhere into the set. Sexual innuendos flew from one side of the stage to the other. He began sporting his androgynous getup, the open trench coat revealing black leggings and bikini underwear. He stepped out and did what he wanted to do. The crowds went nuts. The press started saying that he was outstripping Rick. Rick resented that. Later he wrote that the crowd booed when they saw Prince in his bloomers. I didn't hear any boos on that tour. Rick also wrote about a drum battle between him and Prince when supposedly Rick kicked Prince's ass. I knew nothing about that. I did know, though, that Rick started accusing Prince of stealing his licks and stage moves. I thought the accusation was silly. We all steal. The line of musical thieves is endless, from Chuck Berry to Little Richard, to Ike Turner, to Jackie Wilson, to Ray Charles, to Stevie Wonder, to Michael Jackson. If you don't like the word steal, then let's just say borrow. No matter how you look at it, though, every musical style is built on a previous style. Sure, there are innovators. All the artists I just mentioned are innovators. But innovations are based on stuff that came before. That's what makes the innovations of these geniuses so startling. All at once, they contain past, present, and future. Soon after things got straightened out, there was a birthday party held for Rick, and Prince was there. He was sitting at a table with some people not drinking. I walked up to him, grabbed him by the back of his hair, and poured cognac down his throat. He spit it out, and I laughed and walked away. Thankfully for both men, Prince's contracted dates for the tour ended soon after this, but it didn't end soon enough. Toward the end of the Fire It Up tour, I began to go to work on my next album. Prince had a synthesizer called an OBX back then, and nobody else had one. I loved the way it sounded. So while going to Miami to do tracks for my next album, I decided to borrow it without telling the little runt. We kept it for 2 weeks while we had a break on the tour, used it, and then put it back on his truck. Prince never knew. The album Rick was referring to was the Garden of Love album, which was released in July of 1980. This album was quite different from his previous albums. Garden of Love, my 4th album, was really laid back, with mostly slow summer tunes on it. Most of the songs had been written while vacationing in the Caribbean islands. Every year after I toured, I'd go to the islands. The single was called Big Time and had been written by Leroy Burgess. It was the only song I ever recorded that I didn't write. Rick didn't write that song, but of all the songs on the album, Big Time and Merry Go Round were the only 2 that had Rick's signature punk-funk sound. Perhaps there would have been more, but the album only had 6 songs on it. I usually put 8 or 9 on my albums, never less. This time, because I was angry with Motown, I only put on 6. The single Big Time went to number 17 on the R&B chart, but the Garden of Love album was a big-time flop, and Rick knew he couldn't let this happen again. I had to cancel the tour I'd planned for it. I found out with Garden of Love that success could end any time, and you're only as good as your last record. After Garden of Love, I was afraid my career was over. The cancellation of the tour had crushed me, and I went to Hawaii to think. While in Hawaii, I'd made up my mind about a lot of things. First, I would never cut an album with only 6 tunes. Second, no matter how mad I got with Motown, I would never let my emotions interfere with my music. Rick's next album had to be something special, and boy was it. But before that, Prince released his next album, entitled Dirty Mind. Released in October of 1980, Prince's third album, much like Rick James's fourth album, was almost completely different from his previous work. For You and his self-titled album had more of an R&B sound, but this album introduced a bold and innovative sound that marked a significant shift in his music. I think I matured in a sense. I reached puberty, I got new management, I got a new guitar which brought life into the sound of the album. Most of the songs were written on guitar. The second album was written mostly on piano. Dirty Mind was a huge departure from mainstream expectations, with its sexually charged lyrics and rebellious attitude, challenging norms in not only black music but pop as well. The tracks on Dirty Mind were initially meant to serve as demos for the album, but Prince felt the material was so raw, honest, and timely that he was eager to have it released. When I brought it to the record company, it shocked a lot of people, but they didn't ask me to go back and change anything, and I'm real grateful. Anyway, I wasn't being deliberately provocative. I was being deliberately me. The label didn't ask Prince to change anything, but they were concerned that the explicit lyrics would make radio airplay difficult. After some back and forth with Warner Brothers, Prince ultimately got his way, and Dirty Mind was released on October 8, 1980. The label's concerns proved valid, as many tracks on the album received limited radio play due to their content. I don't think there is any airplay. I think Uptown got some, but the rest of the cuts weren't played too much. Of course, I knew that would happen when I made it, so I wasn't shocked or anything. It doesn't bother me. Since the album was released, I've learned to live with it. I only write from experience. I don't plan to shock people. I write about things I guess people are afraid to talk about. Rick James, however, was skeptical. I felt his songs about his sister, and a lot of his stuff wasn't real, and it was dangerous for the race. A writer and a recording artist has to be careful with what they write. We are obligated to at least be real. It's clear that Rick didn't like this album, so one could imagine how he felt when his protege, Tina Marie, was booked as the opening act on the Dirty Mind tour. The tour kicked off in Rick's hometown of Buffalo, New York, and it was said that Rick attended the show, but he was so angry that he stormed out halfway through Prince's set. Rick might have had a problem with Prince, but Tina didn't. We were on the Dirty Mind tour together. Prince and I never had a problem. We would kick it. Neither one of us drank, so after the concerts, we'd go and sit and have our little orange juice or whatever. He had a lot of respect for me. There were some nights that I would come on stage and I would kick his butt, and afterwards he'd walk by me and go, "Woo, I have to work hard tonight." And there were some nights that he would come by and say, "I whooped you. I whooped you tonight." So it was really awesome, and he's always been really wonderful to me. I don't think Rick really liked the fact that Prince and I were friends, but the rivalry to me as I look back on it, it was really Rick. It wasn't really Prince. It was more Rick than anything. I never really saw Prince feeding into it too much. It really actually saddened me, because I think the two of them would have made some amazing music together. It would have been ridiculous. The tour would run from December of 1980 to April of 1981. But Lady T's time on the tour was brief, which was great for Rick, as she would wind up singing on one of his biggest hits on his next album. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join us next time.